Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinny Eastwood Show. It's the lighter side of genocide, because in a world so full of chaos and madness, if you lose your sense of humour, you go friggin' nuts. In fact, apparently that offends some people, the lighter side of genocide. You know what's even more offensive than a phrase called the lighter side of genocide? Is, scumbaggery. You know? There's quite considerable quantities of scumbaggery out there, I think. And, you know, many whistleblowers and people who are decent men in an indecent time, to coin the phrase of Harvey Two-Face in The Dark Knight. That's really offensive to me, you know, getting locked up because you've reported a crime, having all your money taken off you because you won't bow down to corrupt scumbags. You know, that's really offensive. Heck of a lot more offensive than the lighter side of genocide, but hey, maybe I should just change the catchphrase so that a whole bunch of really soft people won't get offended by it, you know? So that when we talk about huge, massive pedophile rings and things like that are coming to take your kids, and weaponized vaccines and DNA-based bioweapons to specifically target any political dissident that they want if they get a sample of your DNA, you won't be quite so scared or offended because, I mean, come on, grow up. Are you over 18? You over 18? Okay, good. Thank you very much. Try and be a little bit mature about this. I mean, we're under FCC regulations. We can't swear. But I do like to push the limits for frack's sake, because I can't deal with this Shiite Muslim. Now, my very special guest is Scotty Roberts. Welcome back. And I was also very interested to hear your backstory there about how you kind of got into all of this, you know, going through the seminary and sort of disagreeing with a lot of the things that are going down there. And also your magazine that you mentioned sounds an awful lot like this magazine out of New Zealand called the Uncensored magazine.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you familiar with it, are you?
I'm vaguely familiar with it by sight and name only.
Yeah.
I've never cracked a cover, not for any offensive reason, just never had one in my hands.
Well, you know, it happens, and it's really difficult to get them overseas. If not nigh on impossible, because they get confiscated by Homeland Security at the border. I'm joking, by the way.
We're gonna have to remove that from your luggage, sir.
Yeah. Oh no, you're exposing contaminated vaccines here. Oh, that's a threat to national security. What's national security again? Oh yeah, that's right. Making sure the state is secure by ensuring that all the people are slaves.
Oh hell yeah! I think the founding fathers over here would be rolling over in their graves right now. So.
I think they'd be rolling up something, just to pass the time and deal with the stress of watching.
Yeah.
Of watching the nation just burn. and now, there's something I wanted to say. Spirituality and religion seem to be mutually exclusive. That's something that John Eisen from Uncensored told me a long time ago, and it's only rung truer and truer as time has gone on for me, as my spirituality has started to grow stronger, whereas my belief in religions has started to wane somewhat.
Yes,
that's
pretty typical. I think that's very typical, especially of our generation, and I'm only lumping you into my generation. I'm sure I've got good 20, 25 years on you, but what I mean by that is the current mindset nowadays, the people living now, more so with your generation than from mine, is that we are drifting further and further away from those traditional values, or those traditional foundations that were ground into us. And we may come full circle, but I think most of us have gotten to that point of saying, don't tell me what to believe. Let me discover what to believe. If you tell me what to believe, I may not believe it. I may not end up being there. It's like, how many kids do you see who follow exactly in their parents' footsteps politically? Generally, the next generation wants to go, I don't want to have anything to do with that because that was dad's politics. I'm going to do my own thing.
Obviously, you've never heard of the Bush family.
Well, that's a little different. That's a little different. When you've got I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but when you have a dynastic family like that, that's the kind of stuff that's going to happen. Look at the Kennedys, the same thing. How many conservative Kennedys are out there? How many Kennedy children got locked in the closet until they swore they would be liberals the rest of their lives?
I thought it was locked in the closet until they masturbate and reveal their sexual past.
Well, there might be a little bit of that, too. So.
And, the other element is here is it's also dynasties seem to be, I don't know, there's like certain levels of them, like doctors, for example. Father's a doctor, son's a doctor, grandchild doctor, so on and so forth.
Police,
in New Zealand,
in
New Zealand, the lawyers and judges and everything like that, like most of them are actually like related, by at least first cousin.
Oh, really?
Like the majority, I think. I forget the statistic. It's something ridiculous. Like there's 160 odd high court justices, and like 120 of them are first cousins or something like that. It's really freaky.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's kind of like that's almost like the Levites in the biblical Hebrews. The tribe of Levi were the priestly class, and they were the one that carried out all the dirty work and all of that. So
also inventors of the pants known as jeans.
Oh, there you go. Yes, absolutely. Which I happen to be wearing. So.
I happen to be wearing jean shorts. With a suit jacket on, but of course
what's your temperature like over there?
It's getting warmer because I have a heater going, but in general it's not that toasty.
It's summer here. I'm in Wisconsin, just a few miles from the Minnesota border. Minnesota considered to be the icebox of the United States, and which is a misnomer. In the wintertime, yes, it can get 30 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. But that's for a couple of weeks at a shot. Then you go into the summer months. We've already had up into the hundreds with very high dew points and humidities. It's damn near subtropical here sometimes. So you get the flip side of the seasons up here, which has nothing to do with anything else other than to say our weather is wacky too.
Yeah, I remember something Lewis Black said about Minnesota winter. He says he was watching a weather report, and he says, right, it's 20 below. That is not weather. That's an emergency condition. And if you had any brains, you'd call the federal government and say, get us the frack out of here.
Yes. Please send choppers. Yeah, it can get kind of dire in the winter here, but we have that wonderful thing called indoor heat, and we've got snowplows. I got to tell you, it snows here. This last winter, it would snow, and within 2 hours of snowing, the streets were clear, because if you had 2 feet of snow dumped on you, it'd be clear. So the infrastructure is here to live in this climate, I guess. So, and we're not quite frozen Arctic tundra yet. You still have to go a few hours north to hit that.
How many hours sunlight do you get a day during the dead of winter?
Well, we actually get pretty good hours of sunlight. Our sun in the middle of summer at the equinox, sun will come up about 4:30 in the morning, and it won't set until almost 10 o'clock at night. So now the winter, it's a little different. The sun comes up at 7:30 in the morning and sets at 4:30 in the afternoon. So yeah, it's almost like you start thinking of that movie 30 Days of Dark.
30 Days of Night. Yeah.
Of night, that's what it was.
It's funny you should mention that, because I was just thinking about that movie before getting on the radio today, and I was thinking incidentally what John Eisen from Uncensored told me about this. He actually yelled at me on the phone this one time when I told him me and the girlfriend were about to watch that movie. He's like, it opens up dark places in your mind, man. Don't watch horrors. Watch a comedy, man. Watch a comedy.
Nice.
It was actually quite interesting that you should say that. And I was just recalling why I'm never going to live in a cold climate for as long as I live, because I already did. Like you may have indoor heating, but in Dunedin they kind of don't. And even if you try, I don't know how the Scottish build houses. Like there's Scots that settled down there, and they go, You know, they're settled in Auckland and it's like subtropical, and they're like, you know what, it's not quite cold enough. Let's go further south. And they go further south, and it's freaking freezing, and it's got driving rain, and it's cold as frack, and it's absolutely horrible. And they're like, you know, I think we've gone just far enough. It feels just like home.
You know, lassie, unload the goats. We're home.
Yeah. And there's a song like, hey, you get off of my cloud. And in Scottish, it's, hey, McLeod, get off of my you. And what I'm recalling is that I watched my olive oil freeze at room temperature. So people who you know live in cold climates with their central heating and all of that kind of stuff, and they go, oh man, it's really cold here. They don't actually know what real cold actually is, and because that's the question I ask anybody. You know, oh, I've experienced cold, man. It's not that right. Really? Have you seen your olive oil freeze at room temperature?
Now, what do you burn if you don't have indoor heat? What do you do? Do you dig up sod and burn dried sod in the winter? What do you do for heat?
Well, we had a really bad mold problem in our bathroom, and we asked our landlord to come and see about it, right? And he lives just across the road, so he came over about 5 months later. And he said, "Oh no, there's no problem here." He just rips off a big chunk of this wall that he just kind of like painted over, and it's just all black mold there. He's like, and we're like asking him for a dehumidifier, and he goes, "Oh mate, well it is pretty bad. I'll get you a dryer." So he gets, and there was only one power plug left in the house, so we closed off all the doors. Like the hallway was actually a smaller room because we had these real high ceilings and these really large rooms, like impossible to heat. So if you closed off all the doors in the hallway and then put the dryer there, it had no outlet or anything, so all the hot air would come out of the dryer. So we just put two seats next to the dryer, right at the rear of the flat, and just kind of huddle in our sleeping bags next to it for a lot of the winter.
And how did you spend your winter vacation?
Hey, but we did try and go skiing down the street when it snowed. It snowed once when we were down there, and we got maybe about 30 minutes sunshine, like right in the very early morning per day on our house. We were just on the wrong side of the street kind of thing. And the snow was still there 6 months later.
Oh, nice.
That
reminds me.
On the front
reminds me of a very bad joke I can't tell you, and I don't even know why I mentioned it.
Well, I'll tell you a really bad joke about the Canadian hitchhiker. He's hitchhiking. It's a blizzard, and it's real snowy. It's real cold, and a trucker comes up and pulls up beside him and grabs his hand to pull him into the truck, and the hitchhiker's thumb snaps off.
Oh, that's cold.
Yeah. That's cold, man.
The one I was thinking of was, and I could probably say it because it sells on the bookshelves. It's Drew Carey's Big Penis Jokes. Mm-hmm. And he had a joke about snow. And he was talking about, you got your finger on the button? Just in case. He said something about, mine is so big. He said there's still snow on the end of it in July. So there you go. That's all that reminded me of. I know that's about as academic as I get today. So.
Well, that's good. That's good. Well, seeing as we've been talking completely off topic, the reptilian side of thing, I was wondering, because I had somebody, one of my listeners tell me yesterday that I can shove David Icke up my ass and I'm spineless because I won't expose him or anything like that. What's your take on David Icke? Because I just think, you know, he's if the New World Order wanted to you know, control people, why in the hell would they use somebody like David Icke to do so? I mean, he's exposing the planned agenda and all of that kind of thing. He's working directly counter to whatever their goals are, if that was the case.
Well, it's interesting. I wrote a bit about David Icke in my book on the Reptilians, and I think I have successfully lopped off any possibility of ever having a live interview with him after writing that stuff. You know, I say, David Icke, just look at the man and say, if there's a guy that wants to go out there and teach his his New Age teachings and get people excited about, expanding your soul and becoming something wonderful and all of this. More power to him. Who cares? I have other things to do, but if that's what he teaches, then more power to him. But when he lapses over into this fringe teaching of these reptilian entities that live here on the planet, trying to take us over, that all these famous personages are actually reptilians in cloned human skin. The Queen Mum is obviously a reptilian. And, when you start getting into that stuff, you start getting into areas where you're either one of three things. You either really believe it and you're kind of a nut job. Two, you don't believe it at all and you're just putting stuff out there to sell books and to get people interested in hearing you speak because you're tapping into that psychological need that people have to know that there might be, or to think there might be something else. Or three, he's somewhere in the middle there, that there might be something to what he's saying, but there's no way to really know because there's no way to quantify or qualify any of it. You've got a lot of
like bacteria, for example. There was a theory of bacteria long before they had microscopes able to observe it.
Well, very true. Because we can't observe these characters, because we can't... have you seen the famous... now famous Jesse Ventura interview with David Icke?
Oh, yeah.
I love that where Jesse looks at him and says, I just want you to answer my question. And Icke is, I don't think I have to come across that way. And you have this, rah, 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 and then David Icke walks off. And because what Jesse Ventura was accusing him of was just doing things to make money. He says, this is all a money-making thing for you then, right?
Yeah, right. He gave up his BBC broadcasting career in order to make money. Right.
Well. Let me ask you this: do you think a guy that puts forward the things that he's put forward might not have been already seen in broadcasting by those in power? Going, I think this guy's a little tainted in the head. Do you think? Before he even got there, because to do the things he's done, the phases he went through, and all the junk that he's done and put forward, even 20, 25 years ago, you don't go from being, news broadcaster, sports broadcaster, and so kicked a goal today, to I'm wearing all turquoise today. This is my turquoise stage because this is the way I get power. I'm a son of God. And you don't lapse into that overnight unless you've made it up, or you're edging your way there ever slowly but surely.
Or you've had some kind of really profound experience. Like I remember when I was in Dunedin, I got busted for selling cannabis, and I previously believed entirely in the system. I actually told the police, yes, I've been selling weed for about 8 months at university, about an ounce a week, and that kind of thing. And it was only after I found out that even despite my confessions and everything like that, they still made up evidence, that I completely did a full switch around. The entire system suddenly came into aware, and I became a completely different person overnight.
Now, you changed ideology. Let me ask, did you start doing odd things? Did you start claiming odd spiritualities? Did you start, or by odd, I mean different?
Absolutely. Okay. When I was in the cells, I tried to make myself a stone. Like I put myself into the lotus position, which I'd never done, and the pain and the fear and the horror of being in there. Like, this is the first time I'd ever been arrested, and I hope nobody ever goes through this thing that I've experienced. It's kind of half of the reason that I do what I do. I just wanted to make myself a stone so that I wouldn't feel what I was feeling, and I transitioned into this solid state where I didn't blink for what must have been about 40 minutes. Like I'd completely changed. There was something completely different about me. I'd utterly detached myself from reality. So I can experience. I've experienced these kind of really deep, profound suffering and pain and things like that, and that can change anybody.
Well, certainly, and of course, there's a load of questions that come behind that. But that's a great segue into talking about something that comes to mind is something I wrote about in the Exodus Reality about Moses. When we talk about the burning bush and that whole experience that he had, keep in mind Moses was thoroughly Egyptian when he left Egypt. Then he went and married the daughter of a pagan high priest there in Midian, and he spent another 40 years in the Sinaitic religions, the Canaanite religions, the Sumerian religions. And it wasn't until that what he writes as being this experience of seeing God in a burning bush that changed his life forever. And he had his spiritual epiphany. The big question, however, behind it is this. He's the guy who said he saw it. He was the one who wrote about it. Nobody else was there. Nobody else saw God in a burning bush. And this was his story. And this is what drove him to do what he was doing. So in order for him to go back to Egypt, at least by the biblical story, there had to be a huge motivation, because he wasn't about to do that at age 80 years old. But he moves to do that. And yet you see that these people did not connect with him. You look at even the story when they go to Mount Sinai and Moses goes up in the mountain to get the tablets and all of this. There's actually in the vernacular, if you read the text, go back to the Hebrew and look at it in the vernacular, that's where they come to Aaron and they say, "Where's this guy, Moses?" That's in essence what they're saying. They say, "Where is this man Moses who led us out? We don't know who he is. We don't know where he is. He went up into this mountain. Build us a god." And they build the golden calf. And these are not a people who were Jehovah worshipers. They were not a people who were Israelites by anything but blood. They were all thoroughly Egyptianized. They built an Egyptian
How exactly
god.
did they get a gold foundry out there in the middle of the desert is what I want to know.
Well, now what's very interesting, there's a couple of things. First of all, I believe that there's a little mountain that John Ward and I went and climbed up in the Sinai. It's not the traditional Mount Sinai site. It's a little place called Serabit El Khadim. And we were the guests of Sheikh Barakat there, and he put us up in a tattered Bedouin tent on the desert sand overnight. There we are in the middle of the Sinai desert, the wilderness, with nothing there. And we're out there in this little tent, and we climb this mountain the next morning. And up on the top of this mountain, there's an old temple that's been in ruins for over 3,000 years, the Temple of Hathor. And Hathor was the calf, or the cow goddess of Egypt. And around this temple site, in all the mountains and all the craggy plateaus around there, this was the mining capital of Egypt. This is where they were mining mostly turquoise and copper, but this was a big mining station there. And so when they would have visited this mountain, that would have been an operational site with this memorial and this sanctuary up on top of this little mountain. Also on top of that, you've got the biblical text says that the night before the Exodus, or the day after the Passover with the plague of the firstborn and all this, that the Israelites went, and it says, and borrowed all the gold and riches from their Egyptian neighbors. Now, I think that's a little under-embellished. They didn't borrow anything. It meant they sacked Egypt, and they took all their gold with them. And so this is what they had. Everybody surrendered this gold that they had taken from Egypt. They plundered Egypt. That's what it says. And this is why I think, by the way, you don't have much mention of this in Egyptian documentation. You look at big temple walls and chiseled inscriptions of these great pharaohs and these monuments. There's not a single one of those pharaohs that's going to say, yeah, and this slave caste we had, they kicked my ass and they stole all our gold and they pillaged our country. You know, that's not what they did. They built themselves up. These were memorials to their great deeds. So you're not going to see that stuff inscribed. You are going to find other telltale signs, though. But I think, you know, Moses was like you in that jail cell, probably to a certain extent. I don't know what circumstances, after being 40 years there, led him into that, but something gave him an epiphany, and it changed who he was. And nobody else around him, I think, really deeply believed in his epiphany. And it's very evident by the way they acted. You know, they're always complaining. Oh, you took us out here in the desert to die? Weren't there enough graves in Egypt, they ask him. Hey, there were leeks and onions by the Nile over there. What do we got here? We got dirt. And this is the way they were talking to him. This is the guy. This was not the great lawgiver to them. This was remember, it was a whole generation had to die off before they accepted the teachings of Moses and his.
As Obi-Wan said, who's the bigger fool, the fool or the fool who follows him?
There you go. And so they all followed him into the desert. And there's an interesting thing. In my book on the Nephilim, I write this chapter about Moses, and I call him the Pharaoh god of Israel. As you remember, the pharaohs, they were brothers to the gods, and they were gods themselves. They were deified. And in order to lead those people, I think Moses took on the persona of a pharaoh. He equated himself with God far too many times. And sometimes it's very obscure. There's something you'll notice in the writings. It says, it's in the book of, I think it's later in Exodus or early in Numbers, the book. And it talks about how Moses pitched his tent outside the camp, and the pillar of cloud would descend on his tent, and there God would meet him and talk to him face to face as a man would talk to his friend. And then 9 verses later in the same chapter, Moses says, but no man can see God's face and live. So what was he saying in that great contradiction? He was saying, no man can see God's face and live, but God talks to me face to face as a man talks to his friend. You know what he was doing? He was thoroughly Egyptianized. He was raised in the palace. The man who I believe he was had 92 royal titles bestowed on him. One of them was Grand Vizier. The other one was the hereditary crown prince of Egypt. And if he was in any way, shape, or form aligning himself for the throne of Egypt, he would have been considered a brother to the gods. And this is what he brought to the table to rule these people, because this is what they understood. And so he was equating himself. And I believe, I'll just give you it's like going to the last chapter in the book here. I believe that Moses was a man named Senenmut in Egyptian history, mid-18th dynasty. Mid-1500s, 1400s BC, 18th dynasty. He was the Grand Vizier to Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh. He was in the line of pharaohs Tutmosis I, Tutmosis II, Tutmosis III. This is the guy who I believe he was. Now, the name Senenmut was the name given to him by Hatshepsut, who I believe was the young princess who found him in the Nile. She bore the title Pharaoh's daughter in real history. She was the daughter of Tutmosis I. And I believe when she found him, it says of Senenmut, all we know about in history about him is that it says he was born of commoners, and that he was raised to this lofty status, given these 92 royal titles, Grand Vizier, which is one step off of the pharaoh's throne. But his name, Senenmut, means mother's brother. It meant, I, Hatshepsut, your mother, am elevating you to the status of brother with me to the gods.
Which gave rise in modern times to the phrase, a brother from another mother.
A brother from another mother. Exactly. Those Egyptians did some wacky things when it came to it. And, this woman who I believe is the same woman who found him, and we claim by the biblical stories, this is the mother who raised him in Egypt. I don't think she raised him as a mother. I think she raised him from mother's brother to that status, because there is a lot of theorizing that Senenmut and Hatshepsut were actually lovers. If you get in mind
So they were a brother from another mother, something.
I mean, Egypt was like that. She was married to her brother, who died off early because he was kind of sickly. Go figure. But they didn't have a child that was an heir. She had a daughter with Tutmosis II, and that daughter, Senenmut, was the tutor to her. And tutors, keep in mind, were not wet behind the ears school marms. They were usually military commanders, officials of great status. They were the pharaonic tutors to the children.
Wasn't it Aristotle and some of those great philosophers back in Greece? They were tutors as well, weren't they?
I believe so. Off the top of my head, I'd have to go reference it. I like what Einstein said. Einstein said, "I never bother to remember anything I can look up." So I figure I'm not forgetful. I'm not an idiot. I'm just a genius.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I'd have to go look that one up just to verify that fact, but I think you were correct.
Yeah. Well, I think it was Alexander of Macedonia, commonly known as Alexander the Great, was tutored by one of the great philosophers. I forget which one it was. It was name escapes me. Somebody will probably
that guy with the robes, the beard.
Yeah. Which comprises about 80. Which comprises about 80% of all known philosophers.
Right. That's like
except in modern times. In modern times, they not only have the robes and the beards, but they also have a moth-eaten cardigan.
There it is, and Argyle socks. But in my younger days, I was an entertainer at the local Renaissance Festival. And I would always invariably bump into somebody who said, "Oh, you worked at the Renaissance Festival? Do you know Joe so-and-so? He's the guy with the long hair and the goatee." And I'm like, "You've just described about 80 guys to me out at the Renaissance Festival." So Moses, the guy with the beard, the beard.
Birds of a feather, eh? Birds of a feather.
Yes.
That's the interesting part about history, is it all kind of goes in a circle, and it just occurs to me, some people want a revolution, today, because
sure.
look, everything's upside down. Okay, so the medical industry kills people, the politicians threaten people,
kill people.
The police kill people. These are the ones that are supposed to keep people healthy and happy and safe and so on and so forth. And people say, "Oh, that in order to solve this terrible problem, we need to have a revolution." What does revolution mean? Let's have a look. Revolution. Have you ever been on in your car and it's got RPM, revolutions per minute? Yep. Okay, that's what it means. You go in a freaking circle.
I always hail back to Thomas Jefferson, one of our founders here, who in part wrote the Constitution of the United States. He said, "This nation will not long survive without a little bloody revolution every now and then." And it was more a lighthearted type of statement. He was one that's saying, revolution is constant. You constantly have to be revising. You constantly have to be changing things in order to keep up with the times and the growing needs of things. Now, I'm a purist. I'm one that in the United States, I believe the Constitution is the Constitution. I almost used a foul language word.
You can use the words Frank or Shiite Muslim.
You don't Shiite Muslim with it, and that's just taboo. And to change the Constitution, you need to have a really good idea or a really good reason for it, and it needs to be well thought out. You don't do it willy-nilly just because, we're part of the 99% and we want to rebel against that evil 1%. I mean,
I find it really funny how 1% of the people do 99% of the work. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, after the break at thevinnieeastwoodshow.com.
If you take an active interest in maintaining the optimum health and well-being of yourself and your family, the New Zealand Journal of Natural Medicine is the magazine you've been waiting for. Having taken Australia and New Zealand by storm, the New Zealand Journal of Natural Medicine is now available in the UK and Europe. Visit www.nznaturalmed.co.uk or call 01626 337 531 to order your copy now.
My generation, I'm sure I've got good 20-25 years on you, but what I mean by that is the current mindset nowadays, the people living now, more so with your generation than from mine, is that we are drifting further and further away from those traditional values or those traditional foundations that were ground into us. And we may come full circle, but I think most of us have gotten to that point of saying, don't tell me what to believe. Let me discover what to believe. If you tell me what to believe, I may not believe it. I may not end up being there. It's like, how many kids do you see who follow exactly in their parents' footsteps politically? Generally, the next generation wants to go, I don't want to have anything to do with that because that was dad's politics. I'm going to do my own thing.
Obviously, you've never heard of the Bush family.
Well, that's a little different. That's a little different. When you've got
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinny Eastwood Show. It's the lighter side of genocide, because in a world so full of chaos and madness, if you lose your sense of humour, you go friggin' nut. In fact, apparently that offends some people, the lighter side of genocide. You know what's even more offensive than a phrase called the lighter side of genocide? Is, scumbaggery. You know? There's quite considerable quantities of scumbaggery out there, I think. And, you know, many whistleblowers and people who are decent men in an indecent time, to coin the phrase of Harvey Two-Face in The Dark Knight. That's really offensive to me, you know, getting locked up because you reported a crime, having all your money taken off you because you won't bow down to corrupt scumbags. You know, that's really offensive. Heck of a lot making sure the state is secure by ensuring that all the people are slaves.
Oh, hell yeah. I think the founding fathers over here would be rolling over in their graves right now. So.
I think they'd be rolling up something. Just to, you know, pass the time and deal with the stress of watching of watching the nation just burn. and now, there's something I wanted to say. Spirituality and religion seem to be mutually exclusive. That's something that John Eisen from Uncensored told me a long time ago, and it's only rung truer and truer as time has gone on for me, as my spirituality has started to grow stronger, whereas my belief in religions has started to wane somewhat.
Yes,
I wanted to get your perspective.
That's pretty typical. I think that's very typical, especially of our generation, and I'm only lumping you into
your backstory there about how you kind of got into all of this, you know, going through the seminary and sort of disagreeing with a lot of the things that are going down there, and also your magazine that you mentioned sounds an awful lot like this magazine out of New Zealand called the Uncensored magazine.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Are you familiar with it? Are you?
I'm vaguely familiar with it by sight and name only.
Yeah.
I've never cracked a cover, not for any offensive reason, just never had one in my hands.
Well, you know, it happens, and it's really difficult to get them overseas, if not nigh on impossible, because they get confiscated by Homeland Security at the border. I'm joking, by the way.
We're gonna have to remove that from your luggage, sir.
Yeah. Oh no, you're exposing contaminated vaccines here. Oh, that's a threat to national security. What's national security again? Oh yeah, that's right. A lot more offensive than the lighter side of genocide, but hey, maybe I should just change the catchphrase so that a whole bunch of really soft people won't get offended by it, you know? So that when we talk about huge, massive pedophile rings and things like that are coming to take your kids, and weaponized vaccines and DNA-based bioweapons to specifically target any political dissident that they want, if they get a sample of your DNA, you won't be quite so scared or offended, because, I mean, come on, grow up. Are you over 18? You over 18? Okay, good. Thank you very much. Try and be a little bit mature about this. I mean, we're under FCC regulations. We can't swear. But I do like to push the limits for frack's sake, because I can't deal with this Shiite Muslim. Now, my very special guest is Scotty Roberts. Welcome back. And I was also very interested to hear